Introducing your dog to lateral movement. Our objective is to teach the dog to move laterally or sideways as a precursor to following a target stick laterally. The prerequisite is rear end awareness, which can be developed through the step up and pivot tricks in front and at side. You can teach lateral movement in front, moving in either direction, and or beside you, moving towards you and or away from you. This shows the finished behaviour, moving laterally in front of you, and this is moving laterally beside you and away from you. Lateral movement is built on a sound understanding of and value for the relevant position, either in front or on your left or right side. It's therefore helpful to start any session with some classical conditioning of the position in which you will be working laterally. While static, mark and reward for that position. With the dog in the relevant position, and while remaining stationary, we mark and reward for maintaining that ideal position. This builds the dog's understanding that that's a good place to be and builds value for that position. Using a platform helps to achieve errorless learning. Begin then with a reminder of step up and pivot in front and or beside you. It's easy to see how these tricks teach the dog to be aware of his hindquarters and develop his fluid movement of his hindquarters. Let's now look at lateral movement in front. Lateral movement on the box creates movement of the hindquarters, which can then flow into lateral movement by stepping off the box and taking one step sideways. Mark for that one step and then reward. After a reminder of pivot on the box, remove the box and perform the same movement on the ground. To start, pivot on the spot, and you can be moving either clockwise or anti-clockwise. Next, pivot in front and then take a lateral step or two. Mark and reward. Try to mark for hindquarter movement. As your dog understands moving out of pivoting to a straight line, you can progressively increase the number of steps before you mark and reward. In slow motion, you can see more clearly the dog's action stepping across with his feet to maintain a straight position. Another very effective way of teaching lateral movement is using a plank or a series of platforms end on to each other. With your dog in front position, take small steps to the side, initially marking and rewarding each step. Again, endeavour to mark as the hindquarters move. Sometimes the biggest challenge can be getting the dog to be stable and not moving about, so again it's important to reinforce the value of waiting until you give the cue. You can then progressively develop the number of steps in front and the dog's skill and fluidity, and work in both directions. To fade use of the platform, you can then move to use a mat or other surfaces which provide both visual and sensory differences for the dog. If he steps off the mat, position him back onto the mat before rewarding. Here we are changing direction after an unpredictable number of steps in order to increase her listening and avoid anticipation. You can also use environmental aids such as the edge of a path or a driveway to achieve the same purpose. After that, you can transition to a regular surface. Now let's look at lateral movement on your left or right side. You can also teach lateral movement in left or right heel position. Again, start with classical conditioning while stationary, then do a reminder of pivoting on the box in heel position. This takes us back to the very beginning of teaching movement in left heel position on the box. It therefore involves very frequent marking and rewarding, again marking for movement of the hindquarters. Then we transition to the same pivoting action on the ground. A step or two of lateral movement can then flow out of the pivot. You can also teach the dog to move laterally away from you. This can be particularly helpful if your dog has a very strong close heel position, as he's likely to move into that position rather than stay at the end of the target stick once you introduce it to the picture of lateral movement. Now you will start to move towards the dog in very small increments. It's important to ensure that he is not anxious because of the concern that you may step on him, and to break it down and reward frequently after 1 or 2 steps. In this case, it's actually desirable that he moves a little further away from you, but try always to emphasize being straight. And again, mark for hind quarter movement. Then progressively build up the number of steps in a sequence. Introducing your dog to targeting your hand, which may hold food, out wide provides a good foundation for then moving on to following the target stick as the dog and handler move laterally. You can begin with some classical conditioning of staring at the hand while you and the dog are stationary. You can then add this to lateral movement, maintaining focus on your hand with your arm extended as you move laterally. Again, we won't focus on the dog moving straight, and we'll mark in particular for hind quarter movement. This introduction to lateral movement will serve you and your dog well as you progress now to lateral movement following the target stick.